Grace Academy's red brick building stood tall, its history woven into the town's fabric, where whispers of the past clung to the ivy-covered walls. Ella Jones walked through the gates with a heart full of excitement, the autumn air carrying the promise of a fresh start. Her braided hair swayed with each step, and she clutched her new books, hoping to leave behind the struggles of her previous school. As Ella stepped into Miss Simmons' classroom, she could feel the shift in the air, a heavy silence that made her palms sweat. The teacher's eyes, cold and assessing, lingered on her just a moment too long. Ella quickly found a seat in the middle row, hoping to blend in. But even before the bell rang, she could sense it. She was being judged, and not for her intelligence. Miss Simmons, with her neatly pressed suit and clipped voice, began her lecture, her eyes sweeping across the room, but her gaze seemed to sharpen when it landed on Ella. "We have a new student today," she announced. "Ella Jones. I hope you're ready to catch up because we don't slow down for anyone here." Ella sonrió nerviosamente, pero sintió el pinchazo debajo de las palabras. A few students exchanged glances. Ella tried to focus on the chalkboard, but the sinking feeling in her chest wouldn't go away. As the bell rang, Miss Simmons called out, "Ella, a word with you, please." The other students filed out, leaving Ella alone with the teacher. Ella's mind raced, wondering what she could have done wrong already. She clutched her books tighter, bracing herself for whatever came next. Ella stood in front of Miss Simmons' desk, her shoulders tense. The classroom, now empty, felt even colder. Miss Simmons adjusted her glasses, her expression unreadable as she studied Ella for a moment before speaking. "You may find things a bit different here, Ella," Miss Simmons began, her tone icy. "Grace Academy has high standards, and I expect nothing less than complete commitment from all my students, especially from those who need to work, harder to fit in." Ella se tragó, su boca seca. "Yes, ma'am. I'll do my best," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. But beneath her words, a quiet determination simmered. She wasn't going to let a few harsh words ruin her fresh start. Miss Simmons gave a tight-lipped smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "We'll see about that. Now, take your seat." As Ella turned to leave, she could feel Miss Simmons' gaze on her back, like a weight pressing down between her shoulders. She walked back to her desk, her mind spinning with questions. What had she done to earn such scrutiny already? She barely knew anyone here. The next day, during the class, Miss Simmons handed back the first set of graded assignments. When Ella glanced at her paper, her stomach dropped. She'd received a D, despite having studied all night. But what troubled her more were the red marks and harsh comments scrawled in the margins. Not good enough. Lacks focus. She looked over to her best friend Maya, whose sympathetic expression said everything. Ella clenched her jaw, fighting back the sting of unfairness. This wasn't about her work. It was about her. Ella's mother, Monica, noticed the shift in her daughter's mood. Ella had always been bright and cheerful, but now she came home quiet, her shoulders slumped with the weight of something unspoken. It took a few more days of persistence before Ella finally opened up about the classroom tensions and the unjust grading. Monica listened in silence, her heart breaking as she heard about Miss Simmons' condescending remarks and the whispers of the other students. A fierce determination settled in her chest. She knew what it was like to be judged, to have to fight twice as hard to prove herself, and she wasn't going to let her daughter face it alone. "Ella, listen to me," Monica said, cupping her daughter's face. "This isn't about you. It's about something broken inside of her, but that doesn't mean we'll stay silent. We'll stand up for what's right." The following morning, Monica walked into Grace Academy's front office, her steps echoing in the quiet hallway. She was directed to Miss Simmons' classroom for a meeting, and as she approached the door, she could hear the faint sound of students' laughter and Miss Simmons' voice trailing off. When Monica knocked, Miss Simmons' smile froze as she turned and saw her. There was a moment of awkward silence before Miss Simmons gestured stiffly for Monica to enter, her expression unreadable. Ella sat at her desk, wide-eyed, unsure of what would unfold. Monica kept her composure as she began. "I've noticed my daughter has been struggling in your class, Miss Simmons, and after hearing what she's experienced, I have some questions about the way she's being treated." Miss Simmons' jaw clenched, but she tried to keep her tone neutral. "Mrs. Jones, I assure you, I treat all my students equally. Ella simplemente necesita poner más esfuerzo si quiere mantener el ritmo." But Monica wasn't easily swayed. She reached into her bag and pulled out Ella's graded assignments, each one marked harshly. "I understand that teachers have their methods, but these comments seem more personal than professional, don't you think?" The air in the room thickened with tension. Miss Simmons' face flushed, caught off guard by Monica's directness. "I don't appreciate being accused of bias, Mrs. Jones," she snapped, her veneer of professionalism slipping. Monica leaned forward slightly, her voice low but firm. "I'm not here to accuse you, Miss Simmons. I'm here to find a solution. But if we can't resolve this, I'll have to take it to the school board." Miss Simmons' expression faltered, the threat hitting her harder than she'd expected. She forced a tight smile, but it was clear that this was only the beginning of a much bigger conflict. Miss Simmons sat alone in her classroom after the meeting, her hands trembling slightly as she sifted through the paperwork on her desk. Monica's words echoed in her mind, stirring up feelings she hadn't confronted in years, feelings she thought she had buried. She reached into her drawer and pulled out an old photograph, one of herself as a young girl, surrounded by classmates who never accepted her. For a moment, the hardened mask she wore as a teacher cracked, revealing a glimpse of the hurt that had shaped her. But then she shook her head and shoved the photo back into the drawer. She had built her life around keeping control, and she wasn't about to let it slip now, especially not for a student who reminded her too much of her own past. Back at home, Ella sat with her mother, trying to focus on her homework, but the words blurred on the page. She had hoped that her mother's visit might change things, but Miss Simmons had only grown colder. Her classmates picked up on the tension, their whispers behind her back growing louder. Ella could hear them murmuring during lunch breaks, taunting her with names she had thought were left behind in the past. Teacher's pet was the mildest of them, but others cut deeper, making her feel like an outsider in her own skin. She wanted to stand up for herself, to tell them they were wrong, but every time she opened her mouth the words caught in her throat. She could only endure, each day feeling like a battle she was losing. One afternoon, as she walked out of class, she noticed Miss Simmons watching her from the doorway, a look on her face that Ella couldn't quite place. Part contempt, part something else. Ella se fue apresurada, pero el sentimiento incómodo persistió. Maya, Ella's best friend, had had enough. She had watched Ella suffer in silence for too long, and she couldn't stand by any longer. She knew the other students wouldn't listen to her, but there was one person she thought might be able to make a difference. Mr. Daniels, the guidance counselor. She approached Mr. Daniels during lunch, explaining what she had seen in Miss Simmons' class and how Ella's confidence was being chipped away. Mr. Daniels listened, his expression growing more serious with each word. "I'll look into it, Maya," he promised, "but I need you to keep this between us for now, and let Ella know she's not alone." As Maya left the counselor's office, she felt a flicker of hope, wondering if this might be the turning point they needed. Mr. Daniels wasted no time. He observed Missy Simmons' class from the back row, taking note of the way she interacted with her students, especially Ella. The subtle disdain in Ms. Simmons' tone when addressing Ella did not go unnoticed. After class, Mr. Daniels approached Ms. Simmons, gently questioning her teaching methods. At first, she brushed him off, but as the conversation went on, her defensiveness crumbled. "You don't understand," she muttered. "I'm just trying to prepare these kids for the real world." Mr. Daniels looked her in the eye and replied, "But you're forgetting to treat them like human beings, Miss Simmons. That's where the real education starts." Miss Simmons' face flushed, but she had no response, and for the first time she wondered if maybe, just maybe, she had been wrong. Miss Simmons couldn't shake off the conversation with Mr. Daniels. She sat in her empty classroom, tapping her pen on the desk, the rhythmic sound breaking the silence. She glanced around the room that had always been her sanctuary. But now it felt like the walls were closing in, each shadow a reminder of the growing scrutiny on her. For years, she had prided herself on her tough love approach, believing that pushing students to their limits would make them stronger. But now, faced with Monica's determined challenge and Mr. Daniel's quiet disapproval, she started questioning herself. Was she really helping her students? Or was she, as they all seemed to think, just tearing one of them down? She shook her head, brushing away the doubt. "I'm doing what's best," she muttered under her breath, but her voice lacked conviction. She glanced at the photo in her desk drawer again, but this time, the old hurt that stared back at her seemed to mock her. Just as she put the photo away, a letter slid under her door. Miss Simmons picked it up, unfolding it with a frown. Her face paled as she read the words inside, a formal notice from the school board requesting her presence at a disciplinary hearing. It was set for 2 weeks from now. Her hands shook as she crumpled the paper. This was far from over. Ella couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope when she heard about Mr. Daniel's involvement. But as the days went by, Miss Simmons' coldness remained. If anything, her comments had become more subtle, but the edge in her tone was sharper than ever. During a math lesson, Ella raised her hand to answer a question, determined to show she wouldn't back down. But Ms. Simmons barely glanced at her, calling on another student instead. Ella's hand dropped back to her desk, her cheeks burning with frustration. Maya squeezed Ella's hand under the desk, giving her a reassuring smile. "It's going to get better," Maya whispered, but Ella wasn't so sure. She felt like she was trapped in a game where the rules were rigged against her. That afternoon, Ella found herself in the library poring over textbooks, trying to distract herself from the turmoil inside her. But she couldn't focus. Her mind kept drifting back to Miss Simmons' dismissive glance, to the way the other students avoided her as if she carried a contagious curse. As she packed up her books to leave, she noticed a flyer on the library bulletin board for a debate competition. The topic? The impact of prejudice in education. Ella's heart skipped a beat. Maybe this was her chance to speak up, not just for herself, but for all the students who felt silenced. She tore off a tab with the registration details, feeling a spark of determination reignite within her. Meanwhile, Monica was relentless in her quest for answers. She spent hours after work researching school policies, reading articles on students' rights, and even reaching out to parents who had faced similar challenges. She compiled a thick folder of evidence, ready to present it at the upcoming school board hearing. One evening, as Monica sat at the kitchen table, papers spread out before her, Ella walked in. She hesitated at the doorway, watching her mother's tired but determined face. "Mom, you don't have to do all this," Ella said softly. "I don't want you to get into trouble because of me." Monica looked up, her eyes filled with a fierce love. "Ella, listen to me. This isn't just about you. It's about standing up for what's right. If I don't fight this battle now, then how will I ever face myself, or you, when things get tough again?" Ella felt a lump in her throat as she nodded, stepping closer to embrace her mother. "I'll make you proud," she whispered. Monica hugged her back tightly, but as she glanced over Ella's shoulder at the folder on the table, she couldn't ignore the gnawing fear in her chest. What if the board sided with Miss Simmons? What if all their efforts only made things worse for Ella? Ella gathered her courage and entered the school's debate competition. The auditorium buzzed with students, teachers, and parents, all eagerly awaiting the speeches. She stood backstage, her palms sweaty as she clutched her notes. As she glanced around, she noticed Miss Simmons sitting in the audience, arms crossed, her gaze fixed on Ella with a cold, unyielding stare. For a moment, Ella's resolve wavered, but then she spotted her mother, sitting beside Maya, giving her an encouraging nod. Taking a deep breath, Ella stepped onto the stage. "The topic today is one that hits close to home," she began, her voice wavering at first but growing stronger with each word. Prejudice in education isn't just about who gets the highest grades. It's about who gets heard and who doesn't. Her words echoed through the auditorium, weaving a story of unfairness, resilience, and the need for change. Ella's voice broke as she recounted her experiences, but she kept going, determined to make every listener feel the weight of her story. As Ella stepped down from the stage, she caught a glimpse of Miss Simmons' face, her expression unreadable, but her eyes held a flicker of something that almost looked like regret. Ella wasn't sure what it meant, but she knew this moment was far from the end. The date for the school board hearing loomed closer, and the tension at Grace Academy grew thicker by the day. Monica had prepared every argument, but she knew they would be facing a school system that rarely admitted its mistakes. One afternoon, as Monica was preparing to leave her office, she received a call from Mr. Thompson, one of the school board members. He spoke quietly, almost conspiratorially. "Mrs. Jones, I can't say much, but there are people on the board who think your complaint has merit. But if you want any chance of winning this, you need to bring more than just words." Monica's heart raced. "What do you mean?" she asked. Mr. Thompson hesitated. "If there's anyone else, another student or even a teacher who has seen what's going on, it might tip the scales in your favor, but it has to be solid." Monica thanked him and hung up, her mind racing with possibilities. Who could they find that might speak up against Ms. Simmons? And would they be willing to risk their own standing to do it? That night, she shared the conversation with Ella and Maya. To her surprise, Maya's eyes widened with determination. "There might be someone who can help," she said, glancing towards the door. "But it's a long shot." Maya approached Mr. Daniels after class the next day, her heart pounding. "Mr. Daniels, I know you've seen what's been happening with Ella and Ms. Simmons. I heard you talking to Ms. Simmons before. Would you be willing to testify at the hearing?" Mr. Daniels looked at Maya with a conflicted expression. He was well aware of the risks involved in speaking against a fellow teacher, especially in a tight-knit community like theirs. But he also knew that remaining silent would mean betraying his own principles. After a long pause, he nodded. "I'll do it. I've seen enough to know that this isn't right, but we have to be careful. If we're going to confront Ms. Simmons, we need to be prepared for whatever comes next." Maya's face lit up with hope, and she rushed to tell Ella and Monica the news. It felt like, for the first time, they had a real chance. The morning of the hearing, tension filled the air. Monica clutched her folder of evidence tightly as she walked into the school board's conference room, with Ella and Maya by her side. Mr. Daniels joined them, offering a reassuring smile. Across the room, Miss Simmons sat stiffly, her hands clasped together on the table. As the board members took their seats, Ella couldn't shake the feeling that everything hung in the balance, that this moment could determine whether her voice finally mattered, or if she would be silenced again. The first words spoken would set the tone for everything that followed. The board chairman cleared his throat, looking at Monica and then at Ms. Simmons. "We're here to address a serious concern today. Mrs. Jones, you may begin." Monica glanced at Ella, then took a deep breath, standing up to face the board. "Thank you. I'd like to start by saying this isn't just about my daughter. It's about a pattern of behavior that has gone unchallenged for far too long." Monica's voice was steady as she laid out the timeline of events, detailing the incidents of Ella's mistreatment and the harsh grading practices that seemed to single her out. Each word was a carefully placed stone in the foundation of her argument. She handed over copies of Ella's assignments, pointing to the unexplained discrepancies and the overly harsh comments scrawled in red ink. As she spoke, Ella watched the faces of the board members. Some seemed impassive, but others exchanged glances, eyebrows furrowed in concern. Miss Simmons sat rigidly, a tight smile fixed on her face, but Ella noticed the way her fingers drummed nervously against the table. When Monica finished, she sat down and squeezed Ella's hand. "Stay strong," she whispered, and Ella nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. But she couldn't shake the feeling that their fate rested on a knife's edge. The board chairman adjusted his glasses and turned to Ms. Simmons. "Ms. Simmons, you've heard the concerns raised. Do you have a response?" Ms. Simmons stood, smoothing down her skirt, and forced a smile. "With all due respect, this is a complete misunderstanding. My teaching methods are strict, yes, but they are fair, and I believe that Ella, like all my students, has the potential to succeed under those standards. If she struggles, it's not because of any bias on my part." But as she spoke, her voice wavered, and the board members noticed. For the first time, Miss Simmons appeared less in control, and Ella saw a glimmer of uncertainty in her eyes. Just as the board chairman prepared to move on, Mr. Daniels stood up, clearing his throat. "Excuse me, I'd like to add something, if I may." All eyes turned to him, and a murmur rippled through the room. Miss Simmons stiffened, shooting him a warning glance, but Mr. Daniels ignored it. He took a deep breath and began, "I've observed Miss Simmons' class on several occasions, and I've noticed a pattern in her interactions with Ella that concerns me. It goes beyond strict grading. It's a matter of respect and fairness." Miss Simmons's face flushed as she interrupted. "This is unprofessional, Mr. Daniels. We've worked together for years. And it's because we've worked together that I know how you operate," Mr. Daniels replied, his voice firm. "But sometimes, when we care too much about maintaining control, we forget to see our students as individuals." The board members leaned in, listening intently as Mr. Daniels described specific incidents he had witnessed, how Miss Simmons would ignore Ella's raised hand or single her out for criticism in front of the class. As he spoke, Missy Simmons' defenses crumbled, her expression shifting from defiance to something resembling fear. Monica felt a surge of gratitude towards Mr. Daniels, but she knew they still had a long way to go. She took a deep breath and turned towards the board. "I know Miss Simmons isn't alone in this. I know there are many teachers who feel pressure to maintain order in the classroom, but that pressure can't come at the expense of a child's dignity." Her voice wavered and she paused to gather herself. "When I see my daughter struggling, feeling like she doesn't belong, it breaks my heart, but I also see something else. Her strength, her courage to keep showing up, even when it feels like the world is against her. And I believe that courage deserves to be met with support, not hostility." Ella squeezed her mother's hand, blinking back tears. For a moment, the room was silent, the weight of Monica's words settling over everyone present. The board chairman nodded slowly, but then he turned to Miss Simmons again. "Miss Simmons, based on the testimonies we've heard, do you have anything more to say in your defense?" Ms. Simmons swallowed hard, her composure cracking. I never meant to harm anyone," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was just trying to push Ella to be her best. But if I made mistakes, Her words trailed off, and for the first time, there was a hint of vulnerability in her expression. But it wasn't enough to sway everyone in the room. The board members whispered amongst themselves, their faces serious. Monica, Ella, and Mr. Daniels exchanged nervous glances, bracing for whatever came next. Ella's heart pounded in her chest, and she could barely hear over the rush of blood in her ears. Finally, the chairman cleared his throat and addressed the room. "After reviewing the evidence and considering the testimonies, it is clear that there were lapses in judgment on Ms. Simmons' part. We believe she did not treat Ella with the fairness and respect that all students deserve." Miss Simmons' face went pale, and she gripped the edge of the table as if trying to hold on to the last shreds of her authority. The chairman's voice turned stern. "Miss Simmons, we are placing you on a probationary period. During this time, you will be required to undergo diversity training and be closely monitored in your interactions with students. Any further complaints could result in more severe consequences." Ella's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't the complete justice she had hoped for, but it was a start. And as she glanced at her mother, she saw the same cautious hope reflected in Monica's eyes. After the hearing, Ms. Lee Simmons approached Ella and Monica in the hallway. Her usual confidence was gone, replaced by a quiet weariness. She hesitated, wringing her hands before she spoke. "Ella, Monica, I owe you both an apology." Ella looked up, surprised by the genuine remorse in Miss Simmons' eyes. "I didn't see it before," Miss Simmons continued, her voice cracking. "I thought I was helping, but I see now that I was wrong. I'm truly sorry for the pain I caused you, Ella." Monica studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Apology accepted, Miss Simmons. But words aren't enough. I hope you'll show through your actions that you've truly changed." Miss Simmons nodded, blinking back tears. "I will." I promise Ella wasn't sure if she could trust those words yet, but she decided to give Miss Simmons a chance. As she walked away, she felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, hope, and a lingering uncertainty about what the future would hold. In the weeks that followed, Ella noticed subtle changes in Miss Simmons' behavior. She no longer ignored Ella's hand during discussions, and her comments, while still firm, were no longer barbed with disdain. It was as if a weight had been lifted from the classroom, allowing Ella to breathe freely again. But Ella remained cautious, watching for any signs that Miss Simmons might revert to her old ways. She still struggled with the memories of the hurt she had endured, but her mother's words echoed in her mind. "Strength isn't just about enduring. It's about standing up for yourself when it matters most." One afternoon, after class, Miss Simmons caught up with Ella. "I've signed up to volunteer at the community center's after-school program," she said quietly. "I thought it might help me understand the struggles my students face better." Ella blinked in surprise. It wasn't the kind of announcement she'd expected, but she felt a small spark of hope. That's good to hear," she said, offering a tentative smile. Over time, Ella and Miss Simmons began to find a new rhythm. It wasn't easy. There were still moments when Ella felt the old resentment bubbling up inside her. But Miss Simmons was trying, and that effort meant something. During a class discussion about historical figures who fought for equality, Miss Simmons paused, turning to Ella. "Ella, I think you'd have an important perspective to share on this topic. Would you like to lead the discussion?" For a moment, Ella hesitated, her heart pounding. But then she nodded, standing up and addressing the class with a confidence she hadn't felt in months. As she spoke, she saw Miss Simmons watching her, a look of genuine respect in her eyes. After class, Miss Simmons approached Ella, her voice soft. "You have a gift, Ella. Don't let anyone, not even me, make you doubt that." Ella studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I won't," she replied, feeling a new sense of strength settling in her chest. As part of her probation, Miss Simmons began volunteering at a local community center that focused on educational programs for underprivileged students. To her surprise, Ella and Monica were already involved in the program. Working side by side, they began to see each other in a different light. Miss Simmons witnessed Monica's dedication to the children and saw Ella's leadership skills in action. The experience began to chip away at her remaining prejudices, forcing her to confront the biases she had carried for so long. During a particularly challenging day, Miss Simmons found herself struggling to connect with one of the children. Ella stepped in, showing a patience and understanding that left Miss Simmons in awe. "You're a natural at this, Ella," she admitted. "I still have a lot to learn." Ella offered a small, genuine smile. "We all do, Miss Simmons, but it's never too late to change." Through their work at the community center, Miss Simmons and Ella began to build a fragile bond. They shared stories about their pasts, and Miss Simmons opened up about the struggles she faced growing up, always feeling like she had to prove herself. "I thought being tough was the only way to survive," Miss Simmons admitted one evening, her voice thick with emotion. "I didn't realize how much I was hurting others in the process." Ella listened quietly, feeling a pang of empathy for the woman who had once made her life so difficult. "It's hard to forgive, but I'm trying," she said, "and I hope you're trying too, to forgive yourself." Miss Simmons nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she was taking a step towards something better. As they left the community center that evening, Ella glanced back at the building, a small smile tugging at her lips. She wasn't sure where this new path would lead, but she knew one thing: she was no longer alone. The story continues with their journey towards understanding, as Ms. Simmons works to earn the trust of her students and colleagues, and Ella learns to embrace her own strength. With each passing chapter, they face new challenges but also find moments of healing and connection. As they both continue to grow, their story becomes one of transformation, not just for themselves but for the community around them. Months passed, and the air around Grace Academy felt different. Miss Simmons, once a symbol of unyielding authority, became a surprising advocate for change. She pushed for new diversity and sensitivity training for the staff, volunteering her own time to ensure that the school would be a better place for every student. Ella watched her efforts with a mix of skepticism and cautious hope, but over time, she began to see that the change was genuine. Ms. Simmons still had her rough edges, but there were moments when she sought Ella's input during class discussions and even praised her in front of the class. For Ella, each of these moments felt like a small but significant victory, proof that her voice could matter, even to those who once tried to silence it. Ella, too, found herself transforming. The debate competition had lit a fire within her, and she became an advocate for fairness, working alongside her mother and Mr. Daniels to create a student council that addressed issues of bias and inclusion. Her voice, once hesitant, now rang clear and confident, and her fellow students began to look up to her. The community center project became a bridge that connected the school with the town. Ms. Simmons, Ella, Monica, and Mr. Daniels worked together to expand the program, offering tutoring sessions and after-school activities for students who had struggled to fit in at Grace Academy. One evening, during a fundraiser for the community center, Ms. Simmons took the microphone. She spoke about the mistakes she had made, her journey of self-reflection, and the importance of learning from others, especially those who challenge us to be better. Her voice trembled as she looked out over the crowd, but the applause that followed was genuine. Ella stood beside her, feeling a sense of closure. As she looked out over the crowd, she realized that the battle she and her mother had fought wasn't just about winning a hearing or changing one person's heart. It was about making space for stories like hers, stories that deserved to be heard. At the end of the night, Ms. Simmons approached Ella, a small, hopeful smile on her face. "I know I have a long way to go, but I'm grateful for the chance to change," she said softly. "Thank you, Ella, for not giving up." Ella nodded, a warm glow settling in her chest. "Thank you, Miss Simmons, for choosing to change." As graduation approached, Ella faced her final exams with a new sense of confidence. Miss Simmons, now a different kind of mentor, encouraged her through each challenge. Ella's grades improved, but more than that, she felt a sense of pride in her achievements that went beyond any report card. On the day of graduation, Miss Simmons invited Ella and Monica to her classroom for a private conversation. She handed Ella a handwritten letter. "It's a recommendation for your college applications. I believe you have a bright future ahead of you, Ella, and I want to be a part of helping you get there." Ella's hands trembled as she took the letter. Reading through it, she was stunned to see the genuine praise and admiration Miss Simmons had written about her resilience and leadership. It was a gesture that she never expected, and one that cemented the change in their relationship. Monica, standing beside them, smiled through tears. "This means more than you know, Miss Simmons," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. As Ella walked across the stage on graduation day, she couldn't help but look out into the audience where her mother sat beside Miss Simmons. The two women who had once been on opposite sides were now working together to make the school a better place. It wasn't a perfect world, but it was a better one, and that was enough. After the ceremony, Ella took a moment alone in the quiet hallways of Grace Academy, the weight of the past year settling on her shoulders. She thought about all the moments when she had felt small and afraid, and how far she had come since then. As she traced her fingers along the lockers, she whispered to herself, "I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm thriving." Ella and Monica continued their advocacy work beyond Grace Academy, helping to inspire other parents and students to speak up when they faced injustice. Ms. Simmons, now a more empathetic and open-minded teacher, became a mentor to new faculty, guiding them through the lessons she had learned the hard way. One afternoon, as Ella and Ms. Simmons met at the community center to plan a new program, Ms. Simmons turned to her with a thoughtful expression. "I never thought someone like you could teach me so much, Ella," she said with a smile. Ella rió suavemente. Un sentido de paz se asentó sobre ella. "I guess we both had a lot to learn," she replied, offering a handshake that turned into a warm embrace. The community center buzzed with the sounds of children laughing and parents chatting, a testament to the change that had taken root. And as the sun set over the town, casting a golden glow through the windows, it felt like a new chapter was beginning, not just for Ella and Ms. Simmons, but for everyone who believed in the power of change. Years later, as Ella prepared for her first day at a prestigious university, she glanced at the framed letter of recommendation from Ms. Simmons. It had become a symbol of her journey, a reminder that even the hardest battles could lead to unexpected friendships and a brighter future. Monica watched her daughter with pride, knowing that the girl who had once felt invisible was now ready to take on the world. And as Ella walked out the door, she felt the weight of possibility in the air, a promise that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she had the strength to face them. Ella's story became a lesson for her community, a reminder that no voice should go unheard, and that the courage to confront prejudice can transform not only individuals, but entire systems. In the end, it wasn't just about a single victory in a school hallway. It was about creating a place where every student, no matter their background, could stand tall and proud. The journey of Ella, Monica, and Ms. Simmons is a powerful testament to the strength of the human spirit and the possibility of change, even in the most unlikely circumstances. Ella's struggle to find her voice in a place that sought to silence her became a catalyst for transformation, not just for herself, but for those around her. Through resilience, courage, and the unwavering support of her mother, Ella proved that standing up against injustice can spark change that ripples through an entire community. Miss Simmons, once a symbol of prejudice, learned that true strength comes not from holding on to control, but from embracing empathy and understanding. Her transformation from a strict, biased educator into a mentor willing to listen and learn showed that even those set in their ways can find a path to redemption. Monica's determination to fight for her daughter's dignity was a reminder that the role of an advocate is never easy, but always necessary. She taught Ella that silence in the face of wrongdoing is never an option, and her persistence showed the community that change often starts with one voice willing to say, "Enough." In the end, the story is not just about a student overcoming adversity or a teacher realizing her faults. It's about the power of listening to each other's stories, of confronting our own biases, and of creating spaces where everyone is seen and valued. The lessons learned in that small town about justice, empathy, and the courage to change extend far beyond the walls of Grace Academy. Ella, now prepared to take on new challenges, carries with her the belief that even the hardest battles can lead to unexpected friendships and a brighter future. Ms. Simmons, too, steps forward with a renewed sense of purpose, committed to making her classroom a place of growth and acceptance. And Monica, with her heart full of pride, knows that the seeds of change she helped plant will continue to grow long after the last bell has rung. Their story reminds us that while the journey toward justice is often difficult and filled with obstacles, it is always worth taking. And sometimes, in the most unexpected of places, we find the strength to build a better world, one where every voice matters. If you found Ella's journey inspiring and believe in the power of standing up for what's right, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more powerful stories like this. Drop a comment below to share your thoughts on how we can all make a difference in our communities. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Let's keep the conversation going. Together, we can build a world where every voice is heard.